Hello friends! In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to draw this charming wildflower arrangement. I will break the process down into simple steps so you can achieve this look no matter your skill level. Let's dive in. I will be using the Procreate app on the iPad, and at the time of this recording, I'm using version 5.4 of the app. You're welcome to follow along using another drawing app or traditional art supplies. And before we get started, I'd love if you'd like, comment, subscribe, and watch till the very end because it really helps the channel. All right, the first thing we're going to do is create a new canvas. I have mine set to 4,000 pixels wide by 3,000 pixels high at 300 dpi. If you don't have enough storage on your iPad for a file this large, you can use the pre-formatted screen size canvas, which will give you the same aspect ratio but at a smaller size and a lower resolution. We're going to start with a pencil sketch, so choose your favorite pencil brush. If you don't have a favorite, watch this video for some recommendations, or you can just use the same pencil I'll be using. Let's go to the Procreate brush library, tap on the Pencils set, then choose Huntsman. I've got the color set to black, by the way. Now, to make the sketching process as easy as possible, I've created a template which we'll use as a framework for the drawing. There's a link in the description for the free download, but if you're one of my email subscribers, you can skip the link because I've already sent you the downloads. Be sure to check your email inbox. With the download, you'll also receive the color palette we'll be using for this project, which you can import directly into Procreate. Okay, let's import the template. Go to the Actions menu, tap Add, tap Insert a Photo. If you already downloaded and saved the template, find it in your camera roll, then tap to import. As you can see, everything on the template has been broken down into very simple shapes. We're going to build our flowers inside these fan shapes and this circle, and the diamonds will be the framework for the flower buds. These gray lines will be our guides for the leaves and filler flowers. The first thing we're going to do is trace the stems. We're going to go to the template layer, then tap the N to reduce the opacity so the template is transparent. Then create a new layer above. We're going to trace all of the lines that are attached to one of these shapes. I'm going to start here at the center, and you're just going to try your best to follow each line all the way down. I know it may look a little confusing in the middle where all the lines meet, but do your best, and remember it doesn't have to be perfect. Now you'll want to erase the areas where the stems intersect the shapes. If you're curious about which eraser I'm using, it's from the Procreate library in the Basics set, and it's called Stanley. When you're done sketching the stems, create a new layer, and the first step in drawing the flowers will be to add more shapes inside of these shapes. What I mean by that is we're going to build each flower by reducing the petals to basic geometric shapes. Let's start with this fan shape on the left. Starting at the base of the fan, make a smaller triangle in the center, and it should be a little less than half the height of the fan. Now find the center point at the top of that triangle. Then you're going to draw a narrow V shape that extends all the way to the top of the shape on the template. From there, draw two more triangular shapes angled away from each other. The outer edge of each shape should line up just outside the outer edge of the center triangle. Then you're going to add a wedge shape on each end to fill the remaining space. So when you're done, you should have 5 triangular shapes in total, and this will be the framework for the petals of this first flower. Now we're going to do something similar for this flower, except this one will have 4 petals instead of 5. Again, we're going to start at the base of the fan shape, but this time have the left side of your triangle line up with the left side of the fan shape. So your triangle is going to be kind of tilted to the left. Just like we did before, we're going to find the center point of the top edge of that triangle, and again draw a narrow V shape. Using the left side of that V, you're going to draw a triangular shape and make it extend beyond the fan shape on the template, so it's offset to the left of your first triangle. Then use the other line of the V to create another triangle, and this one will be offset to the right. Then you're going to draw a wedge shape to fill the remaining space. Now we're going to use a circle to draw the framework for a simple 5-petal flower. Draw a diagonal line down the center of the circle. Then you're going to draw an X intersecting that diagonal line. We're just going to have to guess at the exact angle of the X, but you'll want it to be fairly wide. Then go back to that first line and erase the section at the bottom. So you're going to be left with 5 lines in kind of a starfish shape. Then add a circle to the center where all of those lines cross. Now we're going to add a triangle around each of those lines to make simplified petals. Erase the center line as you go to get a better sense of the overall shape. Now the spacing won't be perfect, so we'll have to make adjustments as we go. In this case, we don't have quite enough space to center the triangle around this line, so this one will be a little bit off center. Again, you'll want to erase that center guide when you're done. So you're going to continue this process, making adjustments as you go along until you've got 5 triangles fairly evenly spaced around the center circle. Make sure you also erase those lines in the circle when you're done. Now, if the space is a little wonky, we can move some of these petals around to even things out a bit. Tap on the selection tool, select the triangle you want to adjust, then tap on the transform tool. Use the green handle to rotate the shape and then drag it into whatever position you want. Tap on the selection tool again to exit that mode. If everything looks the way you want it, we can move on to the 4th flower shape. Start by drawing a small triangle at the base of the fan shape. Find the center point along the top edge of that triangle, and then draw a straight line from that center point to the top of the template shape. Now, to the right of that center line, you're going to draw 3 more lines fanning outward. And make sure each line is slightly smaller than the last. Now, go ahead and do the same thing on the other side of the center line. Now what we're going to do next is draw an elongated oval around each of those lines, and that's going to create our petals. And that oval is going to get a little more narrow towards the bottom. So I guess it's more like an elongated teardrop shape rather than an oval. You can erase a line in the middle just like we did with the last flower. We're going to continue this process of adding a long teardrop shape around each line. But as you'll notice, space is limited, so each of these shapes is going to need to be slightly tucked behind the one next to it. Again, you're going to do the same thing on the other side as well. When you're done, the petal in the center should be in the foreground, so it's fully visible. And then each of the other petals will be partially hidden by the one next to it. So these are the base shapes for the 4 main flowers. Now we can reduce the opacity on that shapes layer. We're going to turn off the template layer for now, then tap the plus sign to create a new layer. On this new layer, we're going to draw our final flower sketch using those basic shapes as a guide. Instead of using straight lines, we're going to use lots of curves and organic shapes. So we'll draw curves for the sides of the triangles, and instead of a straight line at the top, we can draw a loose, wavy line. So just go ahead and take your time to do this for each petal. I'm going to use basically the same petal shape for this circular flower, but you're welcome to change the petal shape if you prefer and try something a little different. For this last flower, I'm going to soften the shape of this section at the base, but the petals can keep the same shape, so I'm just going to trace what's already there. Once all the petals are drawn, you can add more detail. First, let's add this leafy detail to the base of the 2 large flowers to connect them to the stems. I think those are called the sepals. Don't quote me on that though. Then we can draw a few loose strokes to indicate the stamen in the center of those 2 flowers. And maybe a few line details on the petals as well. We can add a few marks to the center of this flower to make it a little more interesting. And I actually think I'm going to do something a little different with this petal. So first, let me erase these lines. And I'm going to add a wavy line to make it look like this petal is curling. Now let's turn back on the template layer, and we're going to turn those diamond shapes into flower buds. I'm basically just making the shape much more rounded, and at the base we can add that leafy detail that attaches it to the stem. Do the same for the second bud as well. Okay, we're done with the shapes layer, so you can turn that off and either drag it to the bottom of your layer stack to get it out of the way, or you can swipe left on that layer to delete it completely if you have limited layers available. Then to simplify our layers, we can pinch the flowers and stems layers together to merge them so that everything is on one layer. You don't need to do this, but I'm going to update the name of that layer as well. Then we're going to create a new layer at the top of the stack. Now let's add the leaves and a couple filler flowers. The goal here is to make the arrangement look more full and to add a bit more movement. We're going to use the gray lines as our guides, so I'm going to turn the opacity on the template layer back up to make those lines a little easier to see. We can start with a small curved leaf around this line, and this can be a stem with several smaller leaves. We're going to turn these lines into leaves as well. And remember, we're working on a new layer, so that makes it easier to erase any areas that overlap the flowers. Instead of another leaf, we can turn this line into a stalk of lavender. You don't need to get too detailed with this, just use loose lines to indicate the general shape. This line can become a lavender stalk as well, so we'll do the same here. And we'll just finish this off with a couple more leaves. Don't forget to erase any areas that overlap those flowers. If you're pleased with how everything looks, you can pinch your two sketch layers together so that the completed sketch is all on one layer. Now turn off the template layer, reduce the opacity on the sketch layer, then you're going to create a new layer and drag the new layer below the sketch. Now let's add color. As I mentioned earlier, I've created a palette for you which you can import if you want to use the same colors I'm using. If you also want to use the same brush I'll be using, open up the Procreate library, go to the Pastels set, and let's choose Bandicoot. The first thing we're going to do is change the background color. So go to the Layers panel, tap on the background layer, then change the color to Honeydew from the palette. We're going to start with this flower and we're going to add our colors from light to dark. So open up the palette, and the first color we're going to use is Blush. First, outline the entire flower shape. Then increase the brush size and you're going to fill that shape manually. The reason we're doing a manual fill is to preserve the subtle texture of the brush, and this will help us maintain a hand-drawn look. Now we need a darker pink, so choose Rose from the palette and start with your brush at a fairly small size and outline the bottom edge of this petal on the right. Then you're going to increase the brush size and use a light touch to fill that area with color. Make sure your strokes are especially light towards the top so that the color softens and more of the texture comes through. Continue to do the same for the rest of the petals. Remember, you don't want to be too heavy-handed here, so use really light strokes because you want to gradually transition the color so it gets lighter as you approach the ends of the petals. It will help to tilt your pencil so you're using more of the side of the pencil tip. That technique will be especially helpful for this foreground petal because we want the color to be really subtle here. So keep your grip nice and loose and keep your strokes feather light. Okay, let's turn off our sketch for a moment so we can see how it looks so far. And if there are any spots you missed, go ahead and clean those up. We'll come back and add more details later, but for now, turn the sketch back on and we're going to outline and fill the second flower. By the way, we're still using the rose color that we used to shade the other flower. Once you're done filling that shape, switch the color to deep rose, and we're going to follow that same process of outlining the lower edge of each petal, add a little shading, then increase the brush size and use really light strokes so the color gradually lightens. Keep in mind that you want some contrast between adjacent petals, so we don't want the shading to go all the way to the edge on this side. For this curling petal, we're going to add the shadow to the left of this wavy line. Let's turn the sketch off to see how it looks. I think these edges are a bit too harsh, so I need to soften those up. One way to do that is to use circular motions to gradually add a little more color until the transition is smoother. When you do this, make sure you're using the side of the pencil tip with a loose grip so you don't accidentally press down too hard. It's almost as if we're blending, but we're trying to create a smooth transition in values without using the smudge tool. Continue to use that loose grip and light touch to add a subtle change in value to that foreground petal as well. Let's turn the sketch back on, and we're going to tackle this circular flower next. Switch the color to the golden yellow. And again, we're going to outline first, then increase the brush size and fill with color. Now create a new layer and make sure it's above the layer with the petals we just painted. We're also going to switch to the rust color. We're going to outline and fill that circle in the center. We'll eventually add more detail to that as well, but for now, let's go back to the petals base layer and choose the lemon yellow. And actually, I'm going to turn the sketch off as well because we're going to add a few strokes of this lighter color to each petal. Turn the sketch back on, and we're going to paint this flower next. Change the color to powder blue. And you know the drill. We're going to outline the shape, then fill manually. Now we can switch to the darker blue, which is periwinkle. And for the center petal, let's add a line of that darker color on both sides. But for the petals on the right, we'll only add a line to the right side of each petal. Then over here, we'll add a line to the left side of each petal. Then you can turn the sketch off and add a little shading to soften those hard edges. Now let's paint the buds. Let's start with the deep rose, and we're going to outline and fill each of those shapes. Turn the sketch off, then switch to rose. Use that color to add a highlight to each of those buds. Turn the sketch back on when you're done. And the last two flowers we're going to paint are the lavender. As you can see on the sketch, the lavender sits behind these stems, and it will also be behind this flower. So let's create a new layer and then drag it below the petal's base layer. We're going to start with the lightest purple, so let's choose Haze and make your brush size fairly large because we're going to approach this in a really loose style. We're just going to use short diagonal strokes to represent the lavender, and we're going to have these lines tilting away from each other, so we're kind of making loose V shapes. The shape of the lavender gets smaller towards the top, so drop the brush size down incrementally as you move towards the top of the stalk. Increase the brush size again and follow the same process on the other lavender stalk. Don't forget to adjust the brush size as you go. Now let's add a little contrast to that. Choose the lavender color, which is slightly darker, Then add a few more strokes to fill in some of those empty spaces. You don't need to fill every space, but the goal is to make it look a bit more full while adding some contrast. Now switch to the bright lavender. And this one we'll use a little more sparingly because it's a pretty vivid color and we don't want it to be too overpowering. Okay, now turn the sketch back on. Now let's tackle the leaves and the stems. So create a new layer and make sure that the new layer is right above the lavender layer, because remember, the lavender is going to be behind the stems. Then switch to the color Sage. You're going to want to make sure your brush size is fairly small to trace each of those stems. Remember, when you're drawing long lines like this, it's easier to draw from your elbow rather than your wrist. When you're done with your stems, go ahead and outline and fill all the leaves. I'm going to skip forward a bit for the sake of time, but of course you can always pause the video to complete this section. Now let's add the leafy details in the foreground. Go back to the foreground details layer where we drew the center of the yellow flower and the two buds. And we're going to continue with the same color, which is the sage. And again, we're adding the details that will appear in front of the petals. Let's start with the base of this flower. Then add the details on the buds. And the leafy details at the base of the large flowers as well. Now turn off the sketch, and while we're on this layer, let's switch to the leaf green. And we're going to add a few highlights in this lighter color. We're going to stay on this layer and also add some value contrast to the center of this flower. So go to the palette and let's choose the orange. Then we can add a few random semicircle shapes to create a little texture in that area. Then switch to the lemon yellow. Make the brush size quite small and then add a border of squiggle lines around that circle. While we're on this layer above the petals, let's add a few more details to the two largest flowers as well. We're going to start with this flower. Turn the sketch back on, choose the raspberry color from the palette, then add a few loose strokes for the stamen. We can do the same for this flower as well. Then we can switch to the deep rose and add a few lines to the petals on this flower. I've got the brush set to a really small size and I'm using very light strokes. I also turned the sketch off to make it easier to see. For this flower, we can use a lighter color for the lines, so let's try the blush. Again, we want this to be nice and subtle, so use light strokes and keep the brush size small. While we're using the light blush, we can also add a highlight here on this curved petal as well. Since we added highlights to the leafy details in the foreground, let's add a few highlights to the background leaves as well. Let's go down to the leaves and stems layer, turn on Alpha Lock, then choose the leaf green color. We're just going to add a few light strokes of that color along the edges of the leaves. You don't have to be too precise with this. The goal is just to create a slight shift in color so the leaves don't look too flat. For a final touch, we can add a center line to each of these leaves. Create a new layer above the leaves and stems layer, and make that new layer a clipping mask. Then choose the hunter green. Make sure your brush size is quite small, and then go through and add a line down the center of each leaf. Now you might have noticed that this brush is slightly transparent, so you can actually see the stems behind a couple of these flowers. Let's fix that. Go to the leaves and stems layer, switch to the eraser tool, and you can also have that set to Bandicoot. Then simply erase those sections of the stems that are visible behind the petals. And this is why we work in layers, so we can easily make adjustments without affecting the entire piece. There's one more detail I'd like to change. I don't think there's enough contrast in color here, so I'm going to show you a quick trick to fix that. Go to the foreground details layer where we drew those marks, switch the color to blush, then turn on Alpha Lock on that layer. Then you can quickly color over that entire area, and because Alpha Lock is on, The color will only appear on the shapes that are already drawn on that layer. Just remember to turn Alpha Lock off again when you're done. And there's our finished wildflower arrangement. I hope you had fun with this process, and if you enjoyed this video, remember to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching!